And we're back having an interesting conversation with our guest, Eric Lombardi. He is the founder and president of More Neighbors Toronto. Eric, again, just sort of unraveling some of the public policy implications of your research and determinations. One of them, I noticed you said that immigration is another obstacle for young Canadians. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. And I think this is a policy change that really was, a post-Trudeau era change in direction. Historically, Canada has accepted around 1% of its current population annually in immigration. And it was largely focused on permanent forms of immigration targeted towards high-skill individuals. And what we've seen is this departure from that, 30-year consensus on what the purpose of the immigration system is. And so in 2022, we started to see an explosion of temporary residents, both from students and from temporary foreign workers. So just to paint the picture, if our rate in 2015 for permanent immigration was around 300,000 new Canadians.
Right.
As a result of our changes to temporary immigration, we saw 1.2 million Canadians, 1.3 million, and we're on track for similar in 2024. So we skyrocketed up to about 3.7% of our population. But we didn't do the work to look at, where is the infrastructure? Where are people going to live? And how is this going to affect the capacity of our various social systems? And that includes everything from housing to transportation to healthcare to education. And, I think a big driver of this has in particularly been the province of Ontario, in which, it really uncapped student visas and foreign student enrollment in its universities. And at the same time, paused funding and froze domestic tuition. So it forced a lot of colleges into models where, in order to continue to fund their operations and growth, they needed to turn to temporary to international students in order to make up that gap. And a lot of the downstream effects we're experiencing from that lack of foreplanning and thinking. And that's why the housing crisis is being experienced even worse, particularly with rental in areas with a strong university presence, because we didn't consider, where are these people going to live and how is it that they're going to contribute to our economy?
Got it. Another issue that you talk about is Canada's, I'll call it oligopolistic economy. That's part of the story as well. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think there's a common thread between housing and, what I'd call the battle against the not in my backyard attitude that, these voices have leveraged their relationships with those in government to secure policies that favor the outcomes that work for them. But if you look at civil society, there has been a multiplication of industry associations, lobbying groups, just the influences of the major economic players. We're a smaller country with politics. And then legislation comes forward that they've engaged their stakeholders, and their stakeholders are just conveniently the established players in any given industry. And so what they've done is secured what I call regulatory capture, in which the regulatory system that governs their industry also raises barriers to foreign entrants, to new competition, etc. And that creates a protection around the existing businesses that, if they can predict how their oligopoly competitors are going to behave, then they understand how much risk they need to take. And if they don't need to take as much risk, they don't need to invest in much in staying competitive. And all this actually deprives us of better prices, better investments in workforce, and deprives us of the productivity gains that would come from needing to mitigate that risk. And so if you expand that over the major industries, whether it's financial services, where there are really strong foreign ownership criteria and a very, very punitive banking act that make it hard for foreign banks or new banks to start, to airlines, where 50% foreign ownership, telecom, 50% foreign ownership, all of these barriers end up inflicting a cost
Right.
on consumers as well as their own workforces. And that has a material downwards pressure on our overall prosperity.
We're continuing our conversation with Eric Lombardi. He is founder and president of More Neighbors Toronto. Lots to discuss. We'll have one more segment with him. Please stay with us after these messages.